A woman in West Germany, 1959. 7 months pregnant, worn thin by sleepless nights and a nausea that never quite fades. Her doctor offers reassurance in the form of a small white tablet. Completely safe, he says. Safe enough even for a child. She swallows one before bed, another next morning, trusting the quiet certainty behind the prescription. 3 months later, her baby is born without arms. Nothing in that moment suggested the story had already begun much earlier. Between 1957 and 1961, a drug called thalidomide spread from Germany to more than 40 countries, appearing under dozens of brand names, yet carrying the same promise everywhere it went: unprecedented safety. It was described as the gentlest sleeping pill ever made, prescribed freely and recommended to pregnant women struggling with nausea, anxiety, and exhaustion. In West Germany alone, its use shifted from unfamiliar to routine within only a few years. By the time the drug was withdrawn, an estimated 10,000 to 20,000 children worldwide had been born with severe limb malformations. Thousands more died soon after birth or were never fully counted. What began as reassurance had become one of the most defining medical catastrophes of the 20th century. What began as reassurance had become one of the defining medical catastrophes of the 20th century. This is how it unfolded. Thalidomide was first synthesized in 1953 by Chemie Grünenthal, a small German pharmaceutical company formed in the unsettling years after the Second World War. The search was practical: new antibiotics for a rebuilding society. Thalidomide offered none. It produced sedation instead. Calm, drowsiness, sleep. At the time, sedation was dangerous. Barbiturates dominated the market, effective but addictive, with a narrow boundary between relief and death. Fatal overdoses shaped public fear of sleeping pills. Against that background, thalidomide appeared extraordinary. In animal experiments, researchers struggled to identify a lethal dose. The margin of safety seemed vast. Grünenthal advanced quickly. Human testing expanded through the mid-1950s without visible crisis. Absence of harm began to feel like proof of safety. By late 1957, the drug entered the West German market as Contergan. The marketing declared certainty. Contergan was sold without prescription, displayed openly, presented as harmless for ordinary life. Advertisements reassured mothers it could be taken during pregnancy and nursing. Reassurance became the product itself. What remained unseen were the unanswered questions. No systematic testing in pregnancy. No long-term toxicity studies. No sustained effort to understand effects on a developing embryo. Nothing unusual for the time. And that was the danger. Across much of the 1950s, drug regulation required only basic safety, not effectiveness. Animal testing lacked consistency. Formal reproductive studies were rare. Confidence and assumption stood close together, and few could see the distance between them. Far from Germany, physicians began noticing something else. In Australia, obstetrician William McBride saw newborns with severe limb defects whose mothers had taken Distaval early in pregnancy. The cases were separated by distance and circumstance, yet the details aligned. In November 1961, Widukind Lenz contacted Grünenthal. He described a pattern linking the drug to birth defects, built not from laboratory proof, but from repeated histories and consistent timing. Grünenthal asked for stronger evidence. None yet existed in formal scientific terms. Inside the company, skepticism remained. Animal studies showed no teratogenic harm. Millions of doses had been taken. If danger were real, why had it remained hidden? The absence of proof was beginning to feel like the most troubling fact of all. On November 15, 1961, Lenz presented his observations in Dusseldorf. The evidence was incomplete, the language cautious, but the implication clear. A trusted medicine might be altering human development before birth. 11 days later, Grünenthal quietly withdrew Contergan from the West German market. No public alarm, no urgent warning, only a restrained reference to side effects. Outside Germany, the silence held. Disdaval remained on sale in Britain. Pharmacies in Canada still dispensed it. Prescriptions in Australia continued. The pattern had been seen, but not yet accepted everywhere it needed to be. In the United States, events followed a different path. Thalidomide had not been approved. In 1960, FDA physician pharmacologist Francis Kelsey reviewed the application and found gaps difficult to ignore, uncertain long-term safety, and no evidence in pregnancy. She asked for more information. The manufacturer pressed forward, confident in European existence. Kelsey did not move. Her resistance was procedural. Reassurance required proof. Because of that insistence, thalidomide never entered the American market. By the end of 1961, the decisive moment had already passed elsewhere. Across Europe, Canada, and Australia, thousands of women had taken the drug during the earliest weeks of pregnancy, the brief window when limbs and organs first form. Within that span, even a single exposure could redirect development in ways that could never be undone. What statistics had not yet revealed, delivery rooms began to show. Many infants did not survive. Those who did entered lives permanently shaped by a medicine their mothers had been told was harmless. Recognition spread quietly through hospitals and clinics. The visible edge of a disaster already written into thousands of human lives. The tablet was small, white, and ordinary enough to disappear into daily life. Packaging promised safe sleep. Directions were simple. Nothing suggested consequence. It settled into familiar places. A nightstand, a bathroom cabinet, becoming part of pregnancy's quiet routine. Taking it required no deliberation. Everything around it said it was safe. Pregnancy in 1959 unfolded with little visibility. Prenatal visits were brief. No ultrasounds. Few tests. Most of what happened inside the body remained unseen, trusted rather than observed. Life continued normally. Work, rest, family advice, magazine pages. Weeks passed quietly. Morning sickness was endured more than treated. Doctors offered little beyond rest and bland food. Against that background, the new drug felt like relief. Sleep returning, nausea easing, reassurance repeated everywhere. Women in London, Toronto, Sydney took it as recommended. The pregnancies felt ordinary. Movement came. Plans formed. Names were chosen. None of them had reason to worry. Public faith in medicine had deepened after the war. Antibiotics saved lives. Vaccines pushed disease back. Infant mortality fell. Medicine felt dependable. Thalidomide had been tested by the standards of that time. Animals received it. Volunteers took it. Years passed without visible crisis. If danger existed, someone would have already seen it. Nothing disturbed that belief. The drug caused no immediate illness, only calm, sleep, and relief. Subtle numbness or tingling blended into pregnancy's shifting discomforts and was easily dismissed. The pregnancy continued in silence. Cells divided. Organs formed. Weeks gathered into months without visible interruption. Movement appeared in the second trimester. A flutter, then a kick, confirming life unfolding as expected. Everything still looked ordinary. Across different cities and lives, the pattern was the same. Steady progress, repeated reassurance, belief in a safe outcome. None of them could see what had already begun. The injury unfolded within days during the fragile early weeks when limbs and organs first take shape. Hidden beyond any technology of the time, the embryo changed in ways no one could detect. For many women, recognition of pregnancy came only after that window had passed. Birth was expected to bring relief and joy, the future imagined for months. Then the child arrived, and the future everyone had prepared for no longer existed. At first, the births did not provoke alarm. A single case of Phocomelia could be understood as tragic coincidence. It is an extremely rare condition in which the arms or legs are severely shortened or absent, with hands or feet attached close to the body. Such abnormalities were extraordinarily rare, perhaps 1 in 100,000 births, and many pediatricians never encountered one. But in 1959, across hospitals in West Germany, the pattern changed. Infants with similar limb defects appeared weeks apart, then months apart, in different cities. What should have remained vanishingly rare was repeated across distance. The abnormalities carried precision, arms more affected than legs, hands formed without supporting bones, hidden internal defects. The pattern suggested a single interruption at a specific moment in development. Physicians began comparing cases. Letters moved between cities. Conferences filled with uneasy discussion. Something was unfolding, and no one could yet explain it. Familiar causes were considered: rubella, radiation, genetics, and were all dismissed. The timing did not match. The consistency was too strong. What remained was an absence of explanation, growing harder to ignore. In Hamburg, pediatrician Widukind Lenz began recording detailed histories. At first, nothing connected. Then, a sharp detail emerged. Several mothers had taken a sleeping tablet early in pregnancy, Contergan. Not every mother, but enough to disturb certainty. Millions use the drug. If it caused harm, why had the danger remained hidden? Lenz examined timing. Birth defects arise during brief developmental windows. Mapping exposure against embryonic growth revealed a precise alignment, weeks 4 to 8. Earlier exposure meant more severe malformation. The precision was unmistakable. Across the world, William McBride in Sydney saw the same pattern with Withdrawal. Separate observations converged into a single signal. In November 1961, Lenz presented the evidence, circumstantial but consistent. He urged caution. Grünenthal relied on animal safety data and remained unconvinced. Yet the limits of those studies were becoming clear. Species differences, mistimed exposure, incomplete testing. Lab safety did not guarantee safety in the human womb. On November 26, 1961, Contergan was withdrawn in Germany, quietly, without alarm. Other countries followed only after warnings appeared in the medical press. By early 1962, thalidomide had been removed across much of the world. But for thousands of pregnancies, it was already too late. In the United States, FDA reviewer Francis Kelsey had delayed approval over missing safety data. Her caution, grounded in uncertainty, not foresight, prevented a catastrophe on the same scale. Yet investigational samples still caused a small number of affected births, proving the boundary was never complete. By 1962, the global scale of harm was emerging. Thousands of affected children across Europe and beyond. Exact numbers were uncertain. Records were incomplete, and recognition was delayed. What began as scattered tragedy had become a worldwide medical catastrophe. The mechanism remained unknown. Only decades later would research reveal thalidomide's disruption of developmental signaling through cereblon, a cellular protein that helps control early limb and organ formation. In 1962, none of this was visible. What remained was consequence without explanation. Harm revealed not by trials or surveillance, but by attention. Physicians noticing patterns. Mothers remembering tablets, and fragments forming truth. The system meant to protect patients had not failed through intent, but through absence, limited testing, narrow regulation, and confidence without proof. By the time recognition arrived, the outcome was already fixed in thousands of human lives. By the spring of 1962, thalidomide had disappeared from pharmacy shelves, but the children exposed to the drug were still being born. Pregnancies already underway continued toward delivery, carrying with them changes no warning could undo. News had traveled slowly, an uncertain headline, a quiet exchange in a hospital corridor. And for many families, clarity arrived only in the delivery room. By then, the question was no longer what had happened, but how it had been allowed to happen at all. In the aftermath, responsibility did not rest in a single place. Pharmaceutical companies had trusted evidence that now appeared incomplete. Physicians had prescribed a medicine widely believed to be safe. Regulators had worked within systems never designed to detect harm that emerged late, reached the unborn, and left no signal in the person swallowing the drug. What emerged was not a single failure, but the outline of a structure unprepared for this kind of danger. The response formed quickly, and it formed in law. In the United States, the Kefauver-Harris Amendments of 1962 transformed drug regulation. Manufacturers were required to prove effectiveness as well as safety. Evidence had to come from controlled clinical trials. Adverse reactions had to be reported. Research participants gained formal protection through informed consent. Federal oversight of manufacturing and inspection expanded. A field that had rested partly on trust began to move, step by deliberate step, toward proof. Similar reforms followed across the world. Testing became more systematic. Approval processes tightened. Medicines were examined for their effects on pregnancy and reproduction. What had once been scattered and minimal gathered into something closer to a shared global standard. None of these changes could repair what had already occurred, but they reshaped what followed, embedding memory into regulation. Children born with thalidomide injuries grew into lives defined not only by loss, but by adaptation. Some learned to write with their feet, to move through environments never designed for their bodies, to build independence where none had been expected. Families reorganized around care and endurance. Public awareness arrived slowly, transforming private tragedy into shared history. Across time, the meaning of thalidomide shifted from scandal into warning, and from warning into foundation. Modern pharmacovigilance, clinical trial design, and informed consent still carry the imprint of those years. Legal accountability unfolded more slowly. Court cases stretched across decades. Settlements offered financial support that could not restore what had been taken, yet precedent emerged. medicines were no longer beyond consequence, and harm could move backward from patient to courtroom, from outcome to responsibility. Trust in medicine did not disappear, but it no longer meant unquestioned safety. It became something conditional, shaped by evidence and watched over time. Decades later, the drug returned under circumstances profoundly different from its past. In carefully controlled settings, thalidomide showed benefit in severe inflammatory disease, and later in multiple myeloma, where its ability to interfere with blood vessel formation could slow cancer's growth. Approval came only within strict regulatory systems. Patient registries, physician certification, repeated pregnancy testing, enforced contraception, and continuous monitoring. Where such safeguards held, new birth defects were largely prevented. Where oversight weakened, harm returned, reminding medicine that safety is never permanent. It must be maintained. The contradiction never resolved. A molecule once linked to devastation could also relieve suffering and extend life. It did not become safe. It became conditional, surrounded by vigilance, constrained by memory. Progress did not erase the past. It learned to carry it. The legacy of thalidomide does not settle into a single lesson. It remains instead as a permanent question: how certain medicine must be before calling something safe. Uncertainty cannot be removed. It can only be watched. Responsibility remains shared across regulators, physicians, and patients, each decision carried forward in trust. Every clinical trial begins with questions once left unasked. Every warning label carries echoes of injuries first recognized in silence. Medicine continues forward through uncertainty, balancing hope against proof. What endures is responsibility. That progress must be observed as carefully as it is pursued. That trust must be justified again and again. And that safety is never a promise made once, but a condition examined across time. Not certainty, only probability. Every treatment begins inside knowledge that is still incomplete, and every patient becomes part of what medicine has already set in motion, long before the outcome is seen. What remains is not only memory, but responsibility, carried forward from one generation of patients to the next.